So for Malthus, this difference between the poor and everybody else really had to do with a moral character and the moral inferiority of the poor. And ultimately, it was dangerous for this movement of this selective race. It was going to pull them down. And so you'd have to manage this race because they would ultimately affect the superior races and the master race. Charles Darwin, 1859. We're looking again at the destiny of man, biopolitics, population control. And we went over a little bit about how social control and population control are interconnected concepts. Charles Darwin, 1859, Origin of the Species by Natural Selection. Subtitle, the Malthusian subtitle to this would be The Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Couldn't be much more clear in terms of putting it out there. So, and again, we're connecting this right back. We're getting to the whole point of all this. We're looking at the capital city in the most powerful, this image of apotheosis. What does that mean? And somehow our social control is connected to that. We're controlled and managed to somehow get at least some people to be godlike and to fall in this pantheon of the greats that have transcended. So there's a supernatural element to this, and it's always been Rosicrucian and the destiny, the secret destiny of the United States. And just for those who have never, you kind of know it, you can believe it anyway. Well, go ahead and just, that's out there and how this fits that, that idea. What is the destiny? Okay, Charles Darwin. What's he all about? Evolution. The diversity of life arose from a common descent. So I'm just, on and on and on about Charles Darwin. Okay. So I'm down with those connections that go back to the esoteric past. I believe that this is connected to Adam. It's a pagan belief, Gnostic, Kabbalistic, Hermetic belief. These are all tied together through those 7 tenets that we looked at from Glenn Alexander McGee's work, and we went through those 7 tenets. They're all tied together, and so to get to that apotheosis, this is what the oligarchs have always embraced, long before Plato until today. So this population control is part of this biopolitical esoteric agenda that there's a purpose for the United States and the destiny of man, and that we can just kind of dig into a little bit. And yeah, it wasn't just accidental or willy-nilly that they put this apotheosis uh, painting mural in the capital of the United States. This is what they're about, and in relation to all the other pagan um, images, statues around the capital city. The builders build. William Graham Sumner, again, Yale University, picking up the ball, doing some PR work here for the oligarchical class. A drunkard, says William Graham Sumner, and again, he's an advocate of the laissez-faire. So he's just, again, making this assumption that government has no hidden hand, but there should be no government policy. Speaking, of course, for the oligarchs, the government shouldn't have any policy to assist the poor. He's completely Malthusian. Unabashedly will not, so a drunkard in the gutter is just where he ought to be, according to the fitness and tendency of things. So Darwin, in his struggle for the fittest to survive in this world with all the common genetic material around, this is next in line, and he's saying, don't have sympathy. So it's not just a policy, but to the to the extent that laws influence how we think and feel, and how we can kind of rather not read about a military industrial complex, a pharmaceutical industrial complex, a prison industrial complex, because we're in a complex. Again, it's one of the elements of social control or biopolitics. Nature has set upon him the process of decline and dissolution, by which she removes things which have survived their usefulness. And don't get me wrong, I'm not enamored of governments. And I do think that bad habits should not be rewarded. But I'm trying to get us into the esoteric dimensions of this. So, eugenics. This is where it all comes together, from ancient alchemy to the Hermetic traditions to Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, the builders, theosophy, coupled with modern science, we get eugenics, Plato's plan. So it's a set of beliefs that will be defined more systematically in the late 19th century, and practices that aims at improving the genetic quality of the human population. So sets of beliefs and practices. Those practices would be pretty much methods of modern scientific techniques applied in the 19th century to Plato's concepts of the state, population control, and the necessity of social control to achieve those ends. Positive eugenics, or reduced rates of sexual reproduction and sterilization of people with less desired or undesired traits, negative eugenics. It's Plato. The good should breed with the good, and the poor, in light of Malthus's or people like Sumner's uh, ideas of good policy, would be that you would encourage the reproduction of the best and discourage it from the least among us. And so, but this is about using methods of science. And this is what Foucault would talk about, these new eugenics. It's all about the genetic quality. And this, again, by the 20th century, it's a fascination with the genetic material and ultimately the code. The code. Advocate sexual reproduction for people with desired traits. Today, gene selection, people selection has been made positive. So there was a movement, but it's kind of there's a a politically correct way to speak about it. Like if people want designer babies, you're going to look at the genetic material. And when we talk about the future of creating new kinds of human beings, it is neo eugenics. There is a new language about how to speak about eugenics that began in the 1970s, and it's being um, refashioned every day. So Charles, Sir Francis Galton, cousin of Charles Darwin, and there's these Wedgwoods and the Darwins and the Galtons, and they're intermarrying, and that's a whole story. They're practicing what they preach here. I don't know how to get into the results of that anytime soon. Like they sometimes, in some of these families, they'd have 4 or 5 kids that would die, or they'd be disabled in one way or another. But then they'd get the perfect one that would be the perfect musician, or the perfect accountant, or the perfect scientist. Um, but they themselves were very much, practicing the belief system of the oligarchical class themselves. So eugenics, Sir Francis Galton, he coined the term, Sir Francis Galton, in 1883. This alchemical intermarriage of these families. Only the best should breed, he would say. And he wanted eugenics to be a new religion that would spread around the world. And he got that, I believe. And when we go to his offspring and look at quotes and so forth by him, we're going to get an idea of, it's a religion big on evolution and its Big Bang esoteric source, something from nothing, and how that gets animated through alchemy. This idea that you can change things. A fish can become a bird. Lead can become gold. Nothing can become a big bang and create everything in this ordered way. And again, all of these opposites from what should be our human perception of how things work has been this religion. That's why it has to be a religion. It certainly can't be based upon empirical evidence because there's none there. However, it's spouted through the media and education because they're the instruments of this religion. In Memoirs of My Life, Charles Galton, the publication in 1859 of The Origin of the Species by Charles Darwin made a marked epoch on my own mental development. I'm sure in these oligarchical family lines, it's not just, hey, you're managed. You're a guardian class that's managed by somebody else. As it did in that of the human thought generally. So as it's stirring in my mind, it's out there percolating with all the men of letters and science. Its effect was to demolish a multitude of dogmatic barriers by a single stroke. And again, this wasn't just the work of just good, honest scientists. The genealogy of the origin of species is, Darwin's grandfather, the Lunar Society, with its esoteric Rosicrucian origins and its agendas, which is key among them apotheosis, and how the social control would need to direct population control to achieve these ends. Its effect was to demolish a multitude of dogmatic barriers by a single stroke, and to arouse a spirit of rebellion against all ancient authorities whose positive and unauthenticated statements were contradicted by modern science. So, in a single stroke, he's going against the biblical roots of Western culture. And that's heroic, I guess, in the age of science. It's a new religion. What built Western culture the biblical Christian foundations of Western culture were virtually severed with the publication of Darwin's text, says Galton. And now we can plant the seeds of this new religion based on, instead of the ancient superstitions, we can base it on this science. Galton again, I do not see why any insolence of caste should prevent the gifted class, when they had the power, from treating their lower caste, not class, caste, that means more totalizing control of one group over another, compatriots with all kindness, as long as they maintained celibacy. So as long as you breed the way we're telling you to breed, we're not going to whip and chain you. This is his idea of social policy. But if these continued to procreate children inferior in moral, intellectual, physical qualities, it is easy to believe that the time may come when such persons would be considered as enemies of the state because they dare to pass on their genetic material, leave a legacy. And again, this is profoundly um, inconsistent with the foundations of the US Republic, where people, um, by virtue of being human, are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights: life, liberty, and property, and or happiness. And so life itself, men are not to have policies and laws against that because it's not their jurisdiction. So this is unbiblical, and it's inconsistent with the foundations of the free governments of the world that see their belief system consistent with the American Declaration of Independence. So very much, not only do we have the Galtons and the Darwins and the Malthuses all, belong to the same secret societies and share the same magic underwear and secret handshakes, but they're literally intermarrying with each other. So you don't have to, it'd be pretty rough having an accidental view of history here, because you're kind of bombarded with connections here. It's pretty much laid out from their preference for public policy. And it's not very hard to pull back the esoteric world system because they're a part of an oligarchical class that shares all these, these core tenets of these esoteric beliefs, uh, ending in uh, apotheosis by design. And again, we have to begin also to connect that with these um, eschatological narratives so that we can really make sense of what's going on in the world today. And we'll continue to do that.